we're pushing people beyond what they even need to or what they're developmentally ready to do, and setting up those patterns of this is what mom makes me do. And also, was it Quintilian? I know this is in the Great Tradition, but where he says we have to be careful before children are old enough to learn to love learning, that we don't teach them to hate learning.
Welcome to Scholé Sisters, the podcast for the classical homeschooling mama who seeks to learn and grow while she's helping her children learn and grow. Scholé Sisters is a casual conversation about topics that matter to those of us in the trenches of classical homeschooling who yearn for something more than just checking boxes and getting it all done. I'm your host, Brandy Wenzel. You can find me over at afterthoughtsblog.net, spreading my Charlotte Mason joy through blog posts, study guides, audios, and more. My co-hosts today are Pam Barnhill, Mystie Winkler, and Abby Wall. Pam is a speaker, podcaster, blogger at pambarnhill.com, and author of two fabulous books, Better Together and Plan Your Year. Mystie is a second-generation homeschooler with 5 kids and too many projects. With her blog, podcast, and membership, she helps you organize your attitude so you can organize your life. Find her over at simplyconvivial.com. Abby is basically the queen of the Scholé sistership. Abby is a country-living farmer rancher, a loving wife, and mom of 5 who homeschools and reads whenever she can. Registration is now open for our annual spring training. Our coach this year is the one and only Rosaria Butterfield, author of a number of wonderful books, including The Secret Thoughts of an Unlikely Convert and The Gospel Comes with a House Key. We have asked Rosaria to coach us on what we like to call intellectual hospitality. How do we read classics with discernment, handle disagreements with grace, or confront inconsistency and error with love? Rosaria is going to help us with all that and more. Just go to scholesisters.com/hospitality to register. In today's episode, Pam, Mystie, Abby, and I break down the transition to independent work from preschool all the way to high school and beyond. I think this conversation gives us a lot to think about, and so without further ado, let's get to it. Let's start off with our Scholé Everyday. Who would like to go first?
I will go first.
All right, go for it. You have to say your name. You have to say your name. I forgot.
Oh, I am Pam.
That's a good job.
Pam, I am.
Awesome.
So, Walking with God, A Journey Through the Bible is my Scholé Everyday. It is by Tim Gray and Jeff Cavins, and it goes along with my new Great Adventure Bible by Ascension Press. And basically, it takes all the narrative story of the Bible and kind of explains all the fun stuff for you. So you have the, I think I mentioned at the Scholé Sisters retreat, I was reading through their 90-day reading plan for the Bible. I'm giving myself grace. I'm doing more than 90 days. As I'm reading through the reading plan, then I'm going to this little companion book and reading the companion stuff along with it.
So is it like a commentary kind of?
Yeah, like a little commentary.
Cool.
Mm-hmm.
Nice.
Yep. I'm enjoying it. That's all I got.
Well, this is Abby, and mine is far less spiritual or even intellectual. Mine is A Beginner's Guide to Wine by Ken Fredrickson.
So W-I or W-H?
W-I.
Okay, just checking.
The fruited drink, right? Fermented drink. There we go. So it's taste, pair, and savor wine like a sommelier. I know nothing about wine, which is why I got this book. And I heard the author on a podcast, because other podcasts also make me want to buy books.
There you go.
not just Scholé Sisters. So it just has some really great ideas about how to pair wines with certain meals. And like if you're in the Northwest, which is where I am at, and we have Washington and Oregon has great wines and what the regions are known for. If you're just starting out and trying to develop maybe a taste, he has recommendations for that. How to taste wine. And he grew up in a ranch in Idaho. Somebody picked him out of this wine club and they said, "You have a great nose," because he was able to pick out things like cow manure and leather and all these different flavors that apparently, ranchers are really apt to know. And I thought, oh, well, I can go with this. And so it's so far so good.
So after he said there was cow manure in the wine, you still wanted to read the
smell of it.
Okay, all right.
Well, I don't know if you, but the thing is like I have very fond memories of what cow manure smells like in the pastures when I around with my cousins. So he has a chapter called "Wine Builds Character." So I don't know how true that is, but anyway, it's good, and it talks about different varieties and what you would want to eat it with, and a variety of price points, even like how to host your own wine party, like a wine tasting party, and having the right glass. And he even does like geography lessons about different places. So it's actually really interesting. He's got agriculture, botany, fermentation, so chemistry, and all sorts of things. He says it to become well acquainted with the whole production and consumption of wine is really an education in all of these different types of schools, right? Like, in the sciences, and geography and all these different things. So it should be interesting.
Sounds like fun. Mystie, want to go?
Sure. I think I should start off by saying I'm not recommending that people buy this book off of the podcast today. But I'm reading a book by another Jaeger. This is C. Stephen Jaeger. Actually, it's Jaeger. It's titled The Envy of Angels. And it is Cathedral Schools and the Social Ideals in Medieval Europe, AD 950 to 1200.
Whoa, sounds cool.
So this is a book assigned in my History of Classical Christian Education class that I'm taking through New St. Andrews College with Dr. Chris Schlecht. So he said it is Stephen Jaeger. It's pronounced with the hard J. He's taught this class a lot of times. And several years ago, one student emailed the author here and asked him how to pronounce his name. And he told him it's a hard J, not a soft J. So
here we go.
It is Jaeger. It's a kind of a slog, especially at the beginning, especially after the other books that we've read. We've read Quintilian and Cassiodorus and Augustine. And this is the work of a scholar rather than an original thinker, theorist. So a little bit just realizing the difference of someone compiling information and trying to present a composite picture rather than someone who's putting forth we should be doing this. This isn't a prescriptive, this is how education should be, or this is even what anyone should be trying for. This is a history.
Yeah.
Trying to figure out even what education did look like during the period where we don't really have written records.
That sounds fascinating to me. Well, and I appreciate something like that just because I feel like sometimes when we start heading towards that, this is what we should do, then our personal opinions get muddled up with, like, it's nice to separate out the history. And before we start talking about what we should do, just know what was done without like all the opinions. I mean, I know history is still told sometimes with opinions, but I'm just saying it's nice to at least try to extract the two, putting them together. I don't know.
So here's one sentence. He starts off a section on the trivium, which, this time period is really where the liberal arts were being formulated as a thing. The liberal arts is a medieval idea. And he says, 11th and early 12th century school life was a literary poetic as opposed to analytical philosophical culture of learning. The culture required a literature of examples, not texts that posed problems for solving and for rational penetration. And the culture's overriding character was one of personal charisma.
Interesting.
Yeah.
I don't know. This might be the book I buy.
What, Brandy, you're allowed.
Especially since that would be breaking some sort of rule. So
you're going to do something Mystie said not to.
Exactly. Yeah.
How about you, Brandy? What's your school every day?
Well, mine is sort of the liberal arts tradition. Sort of. I just finished the book yesterday. At the end, I read all the way through all of the 6 appendices. So the appendix number, I believe it's 5, is actually the first chapter of the science/natural history book that Ravi is co-authoring, not with Kevin Clark, but with someone else. I can't remember the guy's name. He did tell me at one point, but with some other, science type teacher. It was super good. Like, I'm very excited to buy Ravi's book. I mean, a lot of it was very Charlotte Mason, and not because he's quoting Charlotte Mason, but just because he was saying things like, we want kids to observe real nature and not just laboratory type environments. And he got into this discussion that I thought was really fascinating, which was this idea that we actually are kind of messing up the way the kids see the world if we just restrict them to our lab science experimental approach, because in controlling all the variables, we're not giving them a realistic perspective on how the world actually works. And it's funny because I kind of remember this in physics last year when I was reading through physics with my oldest, his senior year. We were doing the 3 volumes by Asimov. In there, he talks about all these different things, and he's like, but of course, that's not how it really is. And of course, I'm thinking then why are you telling me this? But this is how it acts. If you control every variable and it happens in a vacuum and blah, 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 blah. But in real life, you have all these factors that interfere. You don't actually live in a vacuum. And so it would never do this, even though technically this is what it does. And that's where we get the law from. So it was the same kind of thing, but he kept coming back to this idea that it's not that you shouldn't dissect a frog, but that shouldn't be the first or only thing, that it really needs to build with all of this observation. It kind of reminded me of the idea of, how we'll go to the zoo and we see a lion in a cage. And we do know a little bit about lions from doing that, but it's definitely not the same thing as when you go to a Savannah style zoo where they're out roaming around. And then that is even far removed from them actually being in the wild. And I was thinking about he wants them to see the whole thing. So it's not that you don't ever put something under a microscope and look at it, but you want them to come in contact with the real thing, which is less predictable because we're not in charge the way we're in charge, in the classroom or in the laboratory.
So I need to work in a safari in my homeschooling budget?
I think every time you go out to move your lambs, you're probably having a safari. Because actually, you would love it, Abby. He talked a lot about the idea of, before you dissect, maybe butchering would be in order.
Oh, yeah. Butchering is our handicraft.
Yeah. And about having farm animals and gardens. And I mean, yeah, that's different than the wilderness, but it's also different from dissections.
Yes.
Where everything's clean and perfect. So, well, hopefully your butchering's kind of a little bit clean, but anyway.
Yeah. Well, and there's, my kids just got back from a big hunting trip.
Oh, yeah, right.
And so they had to field dress and pack out a 600-pound animal. So they'll have that ingrained. I mean, they'll know what it requires. So,
yeah, that's pretty amazing.
Yeah.
Hi. Abby here with a brief note about our 2021 5x5 challenge. Hundreds of women are expanding their knowledge and connections with an intentional plan of reading. But it's hard to sustain an intentional plan over an entire year. So, inside Sistership, we have the 5x5 accountability group with weekly check-ins, quarterly meetups, and ongoing conversations about how to make reading work in the midst of real life. Go to scolesisters.com/sistership to find out how to join us and follow through on your own 5x5 challenge.
All right. Can we transition?
I think it's time.
All right. Well, let's transition to our topical discussion. Today, we are talking about independent work. And I was hoping we would start off with definitions because I think sometimes we get into our head that independent work means that mom gets to go, put her feet up and eat bonbons. So when we say independent work, what do we really mean and what do we not mean? Let's put some boundaries around this discussion.
I just think that's an important point right there in using words. And it's not just that this isn't what we are talking about, but really there is no such thing as independent work apart from mom knowing what's going on.
That's a good point. So mom knows what's going on. So when we say independent, we don't mean completely independent then. So mom's maybe assigning the books?
Well, I think it has to do with the role of mom. Is mom giving direct instruction, or is mom mentoring or
checking,
Yeah. Okay. Holding accountable.
Like, even if you're not mentoring, even if your child is totally taking the class with someone else, you still need to be aware of what they're doing. Now, they would be working independently, but what we don't mean is, there's a popular math curriculum that's on the computer. And I've heard stories of people just like letting their children go to town on this math curriculum and never checking in, or only just checking the final results of the grade and then being a little surprised later on at how things turned out.
Yeah, I think I've heard that.
There's always, did you get it done? And did you get it done well?
Well, and even if it is a class with someone else, and that's happening a lot more now with a lot of options for internet classes, I will just say, as someone who taught classes for middle and high school kids before I had kids that age myself, I had students whose moms made sure the homework was done and like had them tell, what was your homework? We'll put it on the list, make sure the mom saw it before they were supposed to bring it to class. And then I also had students whose mom said, okay, I signed you up for this class, so I don't have to deal with this, or you. Which we all feel sometimes when we get a 12 or 13-year-old. The kids whose moms were just dropping them off and picking them up and saying, this is your work, you have to do it for this teacher. You know what? They didn't care what I thought. And they did not do their homework. I knew which kids their mom was paying attention and which there weren't. And the thing is, the kids knew too.
What we're talking about is there's parents who are engaged and then there's disengagement. And when disengagement happens, there is neither success usually for the student or the parent. And I was thinking about the economic principle, the 80-20 or Pareto's principle. Right now, I have a lot of students where I read a lot aloud, and then they do written or oral narrations. And so I'm doing probably 80% of the quote unquote work, and they're doing their 20%. Whereas my older student, I am assigning books, helping with figuring out the right amount of time or pages for them. We're discussing that. It's a back and forth, and helping them by either figuring out books that they really love and I know that they would enjoy, or offering them support like, well, maybe we should get this on an audiobook for you just so that you can retain more of it and things like that. I'm doing some kind of pre-work for it, right? Either pre-reading or kind of skimming it, putting those things in ahead of time, and then they're taking over that. But then I'm still checking in. But yeah, I think that's the goal, is to get them. But I'm never off the hook.
Right. So independent work is characterized by mom's not necessarily doing the teaching directly. She's not necessarily reading the book aloud to the student, but she's still supervising, she's still coaching, she's still holding accountable. I'm just trying to make sure we're getting down to this definition.
And engagement, like you're still engaged.
She's engaged, so she's not checked out. Yeah, I was thinking about that the relationship between that and something like masterly inactivity, which covers more than academic work. That's Charlotte Mason's concept, and I think we can transition from that to just being negligent if we're not careful. Like, it's supposed to be masterly inactivity, not like neglect. So I think that's related probably to this conversation. Would you also say that it's characterized by initiative on the part of the student?
I think that's the goal.
Okay.
And some students have more than others, but sometimes we need to use independent work to help them develop that. I think that it's easy to just expect initiative to happen. If you assign it and tell them to do it, then they'll do it. It often turns out that that's not actually the case in reality.
Well, it's a lot like teaching children chores. You model it, You talk through it, you watch them practice it, and then you check and expect it. A lot of it is just training. We use extra math as one of our independent work checklist items. For a couple weeks, I would have to show them, okay, this is where you sign in and here's what you do. And luckily that one, it sends me a weekly progress report. So that one's great because then I can talk to them in our Monday morning meeting, like, oh, I see that so-and-so left their session early and got a gray box. What's going on with that?
To go back to something I think Mystie said, you said initiatives, the ultimate goal, but it's not necessarily part of the definition of independent work. And I think that kind of brings us to the rest of the topic, which is really transitioning to independent work. I actually divided up the ages. Let's talk about it at preschool. Let's talk about grades 1 to 3, grades 4 to 6, junior high, high school, because I don't know if you guys agree with me on this, but I actually think independent work starts from the time they're old enough to toddle around. Like if they can toddle around, then we can start moving. I mean, in very small ways. I'm not saying that I expected my 1-year-olds to be like responsible. I just mean like we start training them to become independent. If they're old enough to walk away from mom, they're old enough to have some sort of expectations that are moving in that direction. So at least that's my opinion.
Hey, I'm going to caution against that because Don Garrett will tell you, we talk to a lot of people who feel like once they're able to read, like at 7 or 8, they should be totally independent.
Yeah.
I think that's where we're going to put boundaries on it with each age.
Okay.
And talk about what we mean and don't mean.
Right.
So let's start with preschool. When we talk about transitioning to independent work, what happens in the preschool years that starts that?
Well, I don't think we're quite done there with the setup.
Okay. Go for it.
So I think it's a good point there with just parenting overall picture, recognizing that part of our job as a parent is helping them become independent. They're born as our responsibility, and eventually they leave our house as an independent, functioning adult. That's the goal.
Hopefully.
Right. And so knowing where you're going is helpful in every step along the way. And I think it's easy, especially when you are in the everyone's little, it's super intense, and parenting and teaching is requiring a lot from you, to think of independent work as being when it's not my job anymore, or when it's going to get easier and it's going to be this thing that I can just now send them off and it's going to make my job easier, when it's actually just a different job that you now have. And every step along the way, it's really moving them to independence when they're like young adults.
This is the first year that I have somebody out of the house.
Right.
But even then, there have been a couple times where my husband did like check up, how is your schoolwork going? How are your grades? How are they,
Yeah.
So I'm thinking like he's in college. So I was thinking, did my dad do that in college? Yeah, I think he did actually. Not a lot, but a couple times a term, he probably did check.
Well,
and
I think
sure.
Full independence is when you're paying for all of your own expenses as well. So as long as the parents are paying, it's not a full independent situation yet.
That was some of the discussion, was that there are scholarships that depend upon you maintaining a certain GPA or whatever. And so then if that's part of how you're helping pay your way, then it matters.
Well, and we all function better with accountability, even as adults. So thinking that there's going to be this point at which a person doesn't need accountability of any kind is probably wrongheaded, or not recognizing that we even do that, but we can find ways of getting that for ourselves. For a while, we still need to be that support structure.
Yeah.
As needed, because people need accountability, just as people. Definitely as children, but even as people.
That's a good point. It just takes different forms. It's not necessarily your parents checking up on you when you're 45, but we still have accountability built into our lives in some way. So do I have permission to talk about preschool yet?
Yes.
Okay. Can we talk about preschool, guys? So, I mean, and I don't want us to spend too much time on any one area because we got to go through all 5 of these areas, but For preschool, what are some things that you remember doing, wish you did, have seen other people do that are some form of transitioning to independence, independent work in preschool?
Well, I think the first thing is just putting it out there that none of us really do school as preschool. That's not what we're talking about either. We're not talking about giving them math pages or telling them to arrange their blocks in a particular way. I think it has more to do with having them put away their blocks when they're done.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Yeah. It's habit training.
Yeah,
for sure. That was the thing that came to mind for me. The chore type training that I did. I mean, obviously I wasn't really doing that at 1 beyond pick up your blocks, but like at 4 and 5, the types of chore training I did, I didn't think of them as a support for what was going to happen when we started doing school. But I think they very much played into just making our school day smoother, that we had these they were already trained in certain jobs and they knew how to do them. And I already had a habit of checking work and holding people accountable. Like there was a training that had to happen for me too, not just for them.
Well, and even the kind of thing, so my mother-in-law loves to tell this story when my oldest was just a little, 2-year-old or something. And he dropped a ball and it rolled under something and he wanted it. And so I told him to go get it. And I didn't think I was doing anything. Honestly, it was lazy parenting. Like I wasn't going to get his ball. He dropped it. But so my mother-in-law's response would have been to fish the ball out for him, and get it. And I told him if you want the ball, go get it. But those are little steps toward responsibility. If you want something, you are fully capable of getting down and going and getting the thing. And so recognizing some of those small moments where we can allow them to be a tiny bit of self-sufficient, not being at their beck and call and making their lives perfectly easy for them.
I think sometimes we can actually discourage initiative by just our constant intervening. Oh, I think I only remember this because I blogged about it, because it just struck me as an interesting thing where I had just read about Charlotte Mason's concept of masterly inactivity. And so I'm at the park with my third child, who was a girl, and I was watching her trying to get on a swing. And she was probably 2 or 3. I mean, she was really small, but she did not ask for help. Only because I had read that chapter from Charlotte Mason did I not go over and immediately pick her up and do it for her and help her and put her on the swing and push her. And she worked and worked and worked. And I swear I watched this child forever. And I was bored and I wanted to interfere. And I just kept telling myself, that's all we were supposed to do. You're supposed to let her figure it out. And she did. It took her forever. And she figured it out. And she was so happy. And then she did ask to be pushed when she figured it out, because she hadn't really learned to swing on her own. She was trying to take initiative, but my instinct was to cut her off at the pass and do it for her. But really, that probably wouldn't have been good for her. Mm-hmm. It was much better for her to be allowed the freedom to figure it out. I mean, she was perfectly content doing it. Like she wasn't frustrated or anything. I was frustrated because it was painful to watch. So anyway, I often think about how with preschoolers, sometimes we can undo those inclinations to independence or initiative unthinking, just like on accident, because of our desires to be helpful.
I think that independence, when it's initiative, it's always better when it's, their ideas. One year we put in a sandbox, and then some of my aunts and uncles got my kids a play structure. Guess which one got played with more? The sandbox. I think there is a little bit and my kids were really good about playing independently and entertaining themselves and others. All my kids are pretty close in age, but there's nothing wrong with kids being right with you and doing things. Like my kids were with me doing household chores, and they had their own little broom that they would sweep with me, and we would do things like that. But they also knew how to play and entertain themselves. And I think that actually translated really well into sitting at church quietly. And I know that's not always an independent thing because we're all sitting there together, but it's one of those things that being able to, sit and be in a place. And we took our kids out a lot from church as well. So know that.
Well, that kind of raises the question to me. Do you guys think that certain kinds of I don't know, toys. Maybe that's not the right word, but like there's certain kinds of toys that would maybe encourage independence more than others.
I mean, Legos.
Legos. Well, we're in preschool. I think 2-year-olds could eat those probably.
Well, I meant Duplos.
The Duplos.
Oh, yeah.
Or Quattros.
I don't know. Preschoolers are really good about getting in their own head.
Yeah.
And doing their own thing a lot of times. I mean, mine were.
Mine were too.
Maybe that's a bad blanket statement to make.
But I feel like my first preschoolers, it was before there were iPads and smartphones and all these screens that I could hand to them to distract them when they were bothering me. I didn't have those things to offer to my kids.
Me neither.
I wonder about lack of initiative being tied to really early screen use.
Brandy is opening up the can of worms today.
Did I just do a Pam?
Oh, yeah. You mean not handing your child a $1,000 piece of equipment that you were supposed to call people on?
I guess what I'm thinking is just because I've actually seen moms doing this at the park and I'm baffled because we're at the park. Like, I'm not even talking about we're having a bad time while mom was cooking. I mean, we're at something that's supposed to be entertaining. I'm just wondering about if there's going to be in 5 years the same mom complaining about a lack of initiative, but she didn't even expect the child to invent play at the park where there's a million possibilities. I don't know. It's just a thought.
No, my mom talked about that. She said she's been seeing people in the grocery store. I mean, maybe before, I don't know if people are taking their kids to the grocery store, but little kids. And they give them the iPad. It's not even giving them their phone, but they all have their own. And she said, she remembers walking down the aisles and just talking to me or my sister or my brother and just talking to them like, look at the oranges and just pointing things out as they went along and engaging with their kids and being interested in what was going on around them in the world.
I hadn't even thought about that there's less conversation happening at things like the grocery store than there used to be. What is it? It's like, it might've been like Dangerous Minds or something. Some book I was reading was talking about the importance of adults talking to children as part of them learning to think like adults.
Interesting.
Like as mothers are just like exactly what you're saying, Abby, actually, like as they're walking through the store at the grocery store and they're like, oh, we need celery and this is how much it weighs. Or just, I think lots of times when we have little kids, we'll start to think out loud a little bit for their benefit.
Yes.
That actually is part of the developmental process for the child to hear all of that.
Yeah, I narrated all the time what I was doing.
Okay, let's scoot up a slot and go to grades 1 through 3. We're in early elementary school. What kind of things do we do that start to foster independence?
I think a part of it, and this might be less intuitive, but a part of it is not giving them too much work. If we load up those early years with schoolwork more than they need, then it's going to take us making it happen. And a little bit interfere with that relationship because we're pushing people beyond what they even need to or what they're developmentally ready to do and setting up those patterns of this is what mom makes me do. And also, was it Quintilian? I know this is in the Great Tradition, but where he says we have to be careful before children are old enough to learn to love learning, that we don't teach them to hate learning.
Might have been Quintilian. That actually, didn't that come up in the preschool episode?
I think it did. Yeah. So that's my unconventional first thought.
I like that. I think even getting ready for the school day. Do you have your pencil? Do you have a piece of paper? Getting them in the habit of making sure that they are ready and keeping track of their things. I mean, we still struggle with this at times, but it is one of those things that, well, you can do this. I don't need to set everything out for you. And if everything has a home and we put it back, then we know right where it is. And that's really helpful your whole life. So,
yeah, that was my number one thing in these ages. When I had children that were not reading yet, I had made a spreadsheet and I would say, see this says math, go get everything you need for math. And they got the book and the piece of paper and the pencil or whatever it was that we needed at the time. I would have everything for math, like you were saying, Abby, in a designated place, and they knew it was theirs, and all those kinds of things were taken care of. My approach was anything the child can do for himself, he should do for himself.
When we were with Cindy, and Misty, you can probably maybe flesh this out a little bit more, but Cindy was talking about how we shouldn't remove all the obstacles for our children, because that's not making smooth and easy days. And I don't remember what the analogy is, but I know the analogy from like people that don't get impact do exercise that has like an impact. Their bones get pretty fragile. And so we need a little bit of, I'm bringing it back to exercise, sorry. But, we need that resistance, and we need actually to be physically, like it needs to be tough and maybe not jarring, but it definitely isn't supposed to be just like walking on clouds all day. It's supposed to be a little bit steep and a little bit of, tough ground so that our muscles and our bones are staying built. And Cindy was just talking about how we can't remove all of the obstacles for our kids, even if we would like to, because it doesn't promote the kind of health or growth.
I wrote a couple articles, like blog posts on Afterthoughts, inspired by the Anti-Fragile book.
Yeah.
That is actually a thing that he says. He says the comfortable is what fragilizes. I just pulled up my article because I couldn't remember exactly how he put it, but the comfortable is what fragilizes. And around the time that I had read that, I was also reading God in the Dock. And so here's a quote from God in the Dock. This is from C.S. Lewis. He says, "There will be progress in Christian knowledge only as long as we accept the challenge of the difficult or repellent doctrines. A liberal Christianity, which considers itself free to alter the faith whenever the faith looks perplexing or repellent, must be completely stagnant. Progress is only made into a resisting material." It's encountering the person who, for example, disagrees with you or challenges you or questions you in some way that you grow. But I think that's a principle of growth. And if we're removing too many challenges for our children, we're stunting growth, or as Taleb would call it, fragilizing them. I mean, I think it's the same thing Cindy was saying. I wasn't there with you guys when she said that, but it sounds to me like the same kind of thing. We think it's an act of kindness to clear the path for them, but that it's kind of like the story I told of my little girl trying to get into the swing. Mm-hmm. Like that's actually part of growing up and exploring the world and becoming a stronger person. And so our temptations to make everything easier, I think, are good intentions, but they're misguided when we think about the principles that involve growth for human persons.
Example from my own life. I have a teenager currently that is resisting independent work. They would much rather have me do the work. And it would be much easier on our relationship if I would just do that. But I know long-term, it is not beneficial. It is a struggle because it is not pleasant sometimes. And so working towards that independence is really challenging for them and for myself, because it is sometimes feels like a very much an uphill battle.
Yep. My children think I'm the challenge in their life a lot of the time.
Yeah.
Okay. So the principle or strategies I have for grades 1 through 3 so far, or don't give them too much work, because then it depends on you to make it all happen. Have them do what they can do, like gathering their own supplies and getting their paper and all that kind of stuff. Is there anything else for grades 1 through 3 before we move on to 4 through 6?
It depends on the kid and the situation, but grade 2 or 3 is often where I start giving my kids a checklist, not because I expect them to work through it themselves, but it's the beginning of a training,
right,
where I'm walking them through the checklist. So it prevents it from being just me telling them off the top of my head or from my own paper that they never see what's next, so that they feel like the school day is just mom telling me thing after thing after thing.
Right.
But it's this paper here has things to do and we're going to work through. And when these things are done, you're done. So it's a stepping stone so that the first time they get a checklist isn't when they are suddenly responsible to do everything themselves on their own. I'm giving it to them, but I'm also using it alongside them. And it's teaching them that the work is finite. The work is not being made up out of mom's head.
Right.
And they are making progress throughout the day, each thing that they do.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a good one. Okay. So grades 4 through 6, what starts happening at these ages?
So one of the things that starts happening is as you start transitioning to legit independent work, it happens in stages. So there are going to be some subjects that your child is able to do independently on their own, probably starting about this time. But there are going to be others that they can't for a long, long time. So it's not just like you flip a switch at some point and you're like, okay, we're all independent now.
Yeah.
It's going to vary by subject.
And it varies by kid. So like one kid will be ready to do something and then the next kid is totally not at the same age, but they are for something else.
Yeah.
Good point.
And it can even go in stages like up and down. Like you try to make something more independent and it turns out they aren't ready and you have to back down.
Yeah, that's true.
So it's definitely a testing the waters and getting those first few forays into independent. Yeah. But if it were analogous to masterly inactivity, there'd still be a lot of masterly in there.
Yeah.
More masterliness than inactivityness.
Yeah, that's true. In 4th to 6th grade, for me, one of the big things I started doing was when, for kids that were more reluctant readers, I was pushing towards them reading more and more of their own books, which varied wildly by kid in my house because I had some really super early readers and I had some later readers. It was not like formulaic at all. But that was when I started thinking like, out of this list, which books can they do on their own and making sure they were doing it versus in the younger years, I was sometimes still reading things aloud, even if they didn't need me, because I thought it was important for other reasons. Moving them towards independent reading. I know Charlotte Mason talks about the child being able to forage in books for themselves and how important that is, that adults read books on their own. So that doesn't mean not an audiobook, for example, but it's where you are learning without so much dependency on your mom or your teacher. So that for me was a focus in those ages. I was always had to balance it with, it is important that I don't throw them in the deep end and discourage them either.
Yes. And realizing we just did this this year, but realizing that they may not get everything or they may get some things wrong because they've mispronounced it or they've guessed at a word. This is what I was struggling with. I was like, but you're not getting all the words, and realizing that that's okay because when I was in 4th through 6th grade, I probably didn't get all the words either. And they're going to be able to get some things themselves. And their narrations were still good and they were retaining things, but it just wasn't up to an audiobook or me reading aloud comprehension level, but they were reading it independently and doing a pretty fair job.
I think another thing that comes to mind, and maybe some of this is because that's really the age where our co-op starts. So kids under 4th grade will come, but they mainly play. They're there for a play date, and then their siblings are there to do like co-op stuff.
And I'm cracking up that you have grades here, Brandy, because
I know
I'm a homeschooler and I don't know grades.
I don't know if you noticed, but I kind of broke it up the way Charlotte Mason breaks it up. I just didn't call them forms.
Yes.
So at co-op, as kids are moving through that, I start to expect more and more participation from the students, which I do think is this part of independence. So my 4th graders, the first few weeks that they're there, I roll the die to see, for example, who's going to narrate or who's going to answer the discussion question first or whatever. And with the 4th graders, I don't even call on them for like maybe the first 5 weeks or something, because I just want them to get used to it. They can volunteer, but I don't assign them a number and roll them. But as they're moving up through 6th grade, I want them to get to where I can roll the die and they can answer the question or they can give the narration and they can do it well. There's this participation level that is gradually going up over that time period.
Well, and two, it's where you might start to do written narrations or other work that's
Oh, yeah.
on their own and needs to be turned in at some point.
That's a good point.
So what about the division of ages, like why you divided them up how you did, or the grades?
I thought it was a handy division because I do think developmentally there is a progression that kind of follows this generally.
Yeah, I
totally
agree.
is. And like if we look at that division of ages and compare it to something like a middle school situation where they lump 6th graders in with 8th graders, well, then I don't think that's a good thing. Right?
No.
Right. So I think the 4 through 6 works much better together than lumping the 6th through the 8th or something like that.
Yeah, I do too.
And I'm seeing a vast difference. To me, those 8th and 9th graders really should be together. And then I'm seeing a vast difference in a 10th grader going forward. And, I may be projecting from when I taught, 7th graders were horrible. 9th graders were horrible. But 8th and 9th graders together.
Yep. No, I totally see that.
I definitely see a difference this year. Last year I had a 9th grader. This year I have a 10th grader, and I see a big difference. And it wasn't like I did anything. Too. It just happened.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I try to use that 7th grade year, so when they're 12, as a big transition year into more independent, where they get more freedom, like choosing what they do which day, making sure that their own stuff is turned in.
Yeah.
Okay. So I like grades 4 through 6 together. And then if you're going to do junior high, it's going to be 7, 8, and 9. And then high school is 10, 11, and 12.
There you go. Fine with me.
So we had someone who was not feeling well this week. And so they, asked if they could go back to bed. And I said, okay, that's fine. But when we got to the next day, I said, okay, so here's all the work that you missed yesterday. And they were absolutely just appalled because in years past, either they wouldn't have to make it up. I said, where do you think the work went? It's still here. So if you want to skip out, you're still going to have to do the work.
Was the person legit sick?
I'm not sure.
Okay.
Not feeling well, but also other things. I don't know. Legit. Yeah. But even so, we still needed to do the work, and they thought that they would just get to skip out. Like, well, that doesn't matter. But it was important stuff that we needed to learn. And it was part of a chapter in sequence. So.
Right. Yeah. Yep. So that's a issue that
they got to go back to bed, and I didn't begrudge them, and we looked in, checked on them and all that. But work had to be done.
Yeah. When it's a chapter, you can skip practicing your piano. You can even
they got to skip a lot of the normal things, but
when it's a chapter,
I thought you had like doubled up on a lot of the work.
No.
Like,
but I did inform them.
Glad you're not my mom.
No. The things that like some drill and practice and like typing, those things got to be pushed by the wayside. They just did them that day. But the actual books, reading books that we read together that I already did, I was like, I'm not going to read them again. So you get to do it yourself.
I see that.
And that is in that middle junior high-ish age too, right?
Yes.
So I think we just transitioned to junior high. Is that what happened?
I think so.
I thought we were already there. Sorry.
No, that's fine. I think it was a more natural transition. Misty just did it so nicely. So you're saying, Misty, you start letting them decide what day to do things on?
Yeah, it's depended on the kid, whether that happened in 7th or 9th.
Okay.
7th is, even in our scheme of what's happening, 7th is where they have less of the group lesson. Like they move out of group lessons into their own thing. And so they just have more school on their own and a little bit more of a free form checklist, more input and work that I'm not directly supervising. I'm checking on it, and I'm like, if it's written work, I read it. If it's in a book, I look at it, but not necessarily every single day. And I'm not at their elbow anymore.
Yeah.
Of course, now all this is different depending on the needs of your children.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. True.
Because I have one with dyslexia, and, we still work on spelling every day.
Right.
And, we use a spelling program where I have to be there. And I'm trying to think of what else we do together.
Pam, I do so much of my stuff together because I do have 4 that have varying degrees. So it does look very different, but we still do have independent things that they're, responsible to do each day on their checklists. And
totally.
That is really good for them and really good for me because we do have a couple programs that I really love that do not involve me. And that's really needed because I am so involved in so much of the other stuff that needs to be handled hands-on, with us either individually or in a group setting.
This child in particular needs help with some things, but can handle other things by himself.
Mm-hmm.
And then I think one of the smartest things I did this year was I actually talked to the curriculum provider about the writing curriculum and said, look, this is the needs of this child. Should I put them in this level of the curriculum or should I put them in the other level? And they told me to put them in the lower level. And I was a little bit worried about that, but it's ended up being the best thing because he's been able to do it so much more independently.
Mm-hmm.
And I think for a teenage boy, a new teenage boy, a 13-year-old, this is I think it's good that he's able to do most of it independently without me having to sit there, whereas if he were in the higher level program, I would have to sit there and hold his hands through everything. So I think there's something to be said for putting them in situations where they can be independent, even if it's not the highest academic level situation.
Yeah.
Yes, I have kids who are in lower recommended ages, but the quality is there. It's just a little bit easier level and they feel successful and they feel like they can get through it and it's not bogging them down.
Yeah.
And then they can work on that independence. So yeah, I agree.
Especially at that age with boys.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
They will begin separating as an independent entity from their mothers. And I think that's another good piece of advice we've had from Cindy is to let them and not fight that and recognize that that's going on. And it's not to be able to draw the distinction in our own minds about what's resistance or rebellion and what's actually just needing to practice asserting themselves and having something of their own to do. But then as mom, that means also holding them accountable to, if they're going to do it on their own, there still does need to be that accountability and consequences in place. We need to expect them to experiment with whether or not you actually meant that the work needed to be done.
Yeah.
What?
When you said complete the page, I thought about it, or, different kids experiment in different ways, but they will, just like the 2 or 3-year-old will see if no touch meant this hand on this. Are you sure? Do you really mean that, Mom? It's all part of learning.
The other thing too is sometimes I change up what's required. Like, is it a page? And if that's just bogging them down, then I say, okay, if you can work diligently for 25 minutes, right? Like there is sometimes those things that are necessary because sometimes a page is just too much and it isn't helping anyone and it's just frustration. So I've often changed that either way because sometimes if they've finished 3 pages because they got it, then they really don't need to do it maybe for 25, 30 minutes, but they just need to, have that. So being able to talk to them about that, I get a lot more feedback as my kids get older about what's working, what's not.
I think maybe even in 4th to 6th grade, but definitely 7th to 8th grade, I think we can also start letting them have more input into certain things. For example, I use AO. And I don't give my children the option to go outside of that unless I have a good reason why I would want to do that anyway. But there's lots of times along the way, it's like, choose one of these 2 books, choose one of these 3 books. So I will, especially by 7th, 8th grade, let them have some input in that. There's a year, I can't remember which junior high year it is, maybe even year 6, but where they say, read the Iliad or read a retelling like Black Ships Before Troy. And lots of times I'll take my student and say, which of these do you want to read? Because I feel like they're old enough to decide. They have to read one of them. And I've had some choose one and some choose the other. And whatever. They'll probably get the Iliad aloud at some point anyway, so I'm not worried about them completely missing it. But I actually think, especially by the time they hit like 13, that kind of helps with buy-in.
Mm-hmm.
Not that they need to design their own curriculum, but just that they got to give some input along the way. It seems to help with their initiative or investment or...
Oh, I totally agree. I mean, I get all kinds of input. I'd probably to the extent that would appall you. So I'm like, hey, what do we want to learn about next year? What you interested in? And I've gotten a lot.
Are you a secret unschooler?
I am a secret unschooler. Except I make them do things so that unschoolers would kick me out. But yeah, as they've gotten older, I've gone the route of what are we interested in? And that's where we go.
Yeah. So things like Bible reading. Do you guys assign a specific Bible reading in junior high, or are you just holding them accountable for it? How do you handle something like that in junior high?
You're talking like personal Bible reading?
Well, I'll just kind of leave it open. I think some people do school and personal. Some people kind of see it as blended. I don't know. Like, I'm just kind of curious as far as it's not really work. Like, I don't really put that in the category of schoolwork, but I'm just wondering how you approach it. Because that's another area of independence where ideally, when they graduate, they will want to read their Bible and they will do it on their own, right?
Right.
So I'm thinking junior high is kind of a critical age for maybe starting to move that direction. I don't know. So what do you do?
We do ours together, and they know I read my Bible, and my high schooler picked it up on his own, kind of a daily thing. And so I have not assigned it.
Okay.
I do really hope that they will make it part of their daily habit. I mean, we do it as a family, or, as the kids and we're going through Acts right now. And we also memorize verses in morning time. If I find a passage that I've read that I want to share with them, then we often will do a Proverbs of the day. So they're getting lots of the word in the day. And so I have not assigned it.
We do it in morning time.
Okay.
Yeah, we have scripture reading as a part of morning time. I mean, just a chapter in Proverbs and then whatever we're doing for memory work. So there is some scripture in the day. And in the younger grades, I do put some Bible reading on their checklist. To me, those are the habit building years, and the checklist is for habit training. And then usually it's 7th grade. I have a program or a curriculum that I've used so far with all of them. The most important thing you'll ever study. That's a through the Bible curriculum. So it gives reading assignments and it has like short answer. It's a workbook, but it gives historical context and that sort of thing. So I assign that over the course of 2 years in 7th and 8th. And that's when I transition. I no longer put Bible reading on their checklist. I'm assigning them. I would consider it more of moving into theology as a subject that starts with, it is schoolwork. And I'll talk to them about, do you want to do a Bible reading? I'll offer them different Bible reading programs, schedules, or printables, or show them that we have the Bible on Audible, or, I have resources. And so I encourage them to also do some personal reading, but I don't assign it or check up on it either. But then from that point on, they still have something because they have some kind of something in the theology category or scripture category that is academic in school and different from personal devotional reading.
That sounds similar to what I do. I don't know that I have exact ages. It's more like when I remember, I transition to the next thing. So whenever that happens. But I did the same kind of thing, Mystie, where it was like in the early years, they were assigned certain Bible reading. And I did view that as habit training. And then now I actually don't remember what I do with my 15-year-old, if anything. I mean, we do books, but I can't remember if Bible reading's on her checklist or not. But with the other two, they're 12 and 13, they have what used to have the assignments in it now is just an empty space. And they're supposed to pick what they want to read, and they write it in the block so that I know what they read. It was a transition to complete independence to have like a set time where they have the habit, but it's kind of coupled with their own
choice
initiative because they're making the choice. So I wish I knew what I was doing to my 15-year-old. Now I'm doubting myself. Oh, well. It's never too late to check up on these things. Okay, so high school. Big thing for me with high school is that in high school, they have the freedom to, well, first of all, by 11th grade, I give them a list of what needs to be done in a term, and they have to schedule it out. But also, they have permission to work during the day where they could maybe not keep normal school hours at that point.
This is 11th grade, you said?
Yeah. So they're not required to have a job necessarily. Well, I shouldn't say that. They kind of are, but they're not required to have a job out of the house. If they have some sort of small business or whatever, it doesn't have to be any particular kind of thing, but they have permission at that point. If they get a job that requires them to work during the time we would normally be doing school, that's fine. They just have to get their work done when they're not working. So I allow more flexibility versus in the younger years, they have to be, at circle time at a certain time. And I'm still trying to get them done by 1:00 in the afternoon or what, like all that kind of stuff kind of goes away or gets really flexible.
Well, I have even more of a cop out because we do dual enrollment. So my 11th and 12th graders are at the community college. I'm not doing anything with them. They're independent at that point.
So are you checking up? Do you check that they do their work or are they completely independent?
That depends, right? We've only had one so far. So right now my second is in his last year of homeschooling.
Okay.
But with my oldest's first quarter, we would all, I'd ask him. But then about halfway through the first quarter, I wanted to see some actual grades. And it turns out that maybe we needed to review what studying meant. And that I know that and this was his first time he'd ever taken tests or had grades ever.
Oh, yeah.
So it was a totally experimental. And we did have a little bit of doubt that maybe just starting off with college being the first time grades and tests ever happened might not have been the best plan, but it was just a few weeks. And then he pulled it back together. So after we told him that your grades actually matter now. So we want to see these as, we know you can do better,
Yeah.
It was a hard first few weeks to learn what studying for a different context meant. It was just this new set of skills. And we were all trying to figure that out. So I'm sure the next few times it's going to be easier for everyone because we know what to expect a little bit more now.
Yeah.
I think that's part of teaching kids more independence is expecting bumps along the way and not saying that, if there's something that's difficult and it looks like it's not working out that well right now, we must have done something wrong or we have to totally start from scratch or we failed here or something. But to just realize this is what we're figuring out now and we can figure it out and we will figure it out. And we don't expect it to be a smooth and easy path. It's going to be bumpy.
Yeah. Yes. My oldest is starting this winter on the community college program. And, he set his alarm incorrectly to do a Zoom meeting for one of his, getting it all set up. So twice. So that's been hilarious and a good learning experience. And he, has had to humble himself and apologize. And I think he's got it now. So that was quite hilarious, but I get to be, well, you better call and make that appointment again, and, so it's been a fun way for him to figure that out. And he did make the observation. He goes, I actually think this is going to be good for me because I'm going to be really held accountable if I don't want to pay for this myself. And I said, yeah, exactly. He's like, because I know you make me do things and I do them mostly, but I have a lot more wiggle room, mostly. Yeah. So he's aware that accountability is really good. And he's looking forward to that.
Yeah.
Those hard deadlines and not being able to talk his way out of things. So,
well, and then you also get the experience of things like one of my oldest's college classes, one of his professors hasn't actually given back any homework. So he actually has no idea how he's doing in the class. But you still do the work.
Terrible.
And you still, so it's getting all of those experiences of working for different kinds of people. And those are all good experiences to have. So he's in his senior year now. and just registered for the second quarter of the year entirely on his own. He told me which classes he was thinking were next. He did the paperwork for figuring out what he needs to do to get his AA degree and did all of the paperwork with the high school and the counselor. And all I do is pay the bill.
Great. So in high school, well, Abby, is your plan like Mistie's to always do
I
college
don't know if that's going to
second half of high
be.
school?
No, I think actually one of my children will probably do more work, actually. I'm not sure if all my kids are going to college or not. My husband did a little bit of community college, and I have no problem with kids picking a few classes and just doing those. One of my children will probably be a sheep herder, and they don't need to go to School of Agriculture to do that. If they wanted to do, they don't. They already have more knowledge than probably, or of certain things, certain aspects than they would learn in a classroom. I think if they could pick and choose and piecemeal some things, like they were talking about in accounting in a business class, and I thought that would be very, very smart. So no, I don't think my next child in line will be doing college in a traditional sense, but maybe just classes here and there.
Yeah. Pam, what about you? Are you doing the college route?
Not right now. I mean, I don't know that we're going to in high school. Maybe when she gets to her senior year, we'll start doing a couple things, but not right now.
Yeah. We've never done it, but it's never actually made sense. And I don't think it's set up the way you guys talk about, Mystie and Abby.
Ours, you have to pay for it. You have to pay for the books. You have to pay for everything. So it's kind of like.
Yeah, mine is free unless you don't pass a class or you don't finish on time. So.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure you have to pay. But our community colleges are really super overcrowded too. So it's, from what I've heard, very difficult to get classes. I don't know though. I haven't looked into it a whole lot just because like I said, it's never really made sense for us. So it does seem though that the independence is going to look different if you're not doing that. With my oldest for 11th grade, there was a great books program that he was a part of. So even though he wasn't doing the college thing, he had, a day a week that he actually got in the car, drove himself to class, was in class all day, came home, and then there was homework and all this stuff that had to be done before the next meeting, and he had to keep up with all that. And I mean, I talked to him about it and stuff, but it was hard for me to know what was going on. I didn't have a firm grasp even of everything that was happening. So he had to be responsible for it all. But I have wondered, actually, with the other ones coming up, that's no longer an option, and we're still shut down. So there's not even very much stuff in person. How to make sure I'm still moving towards independence when I feel like they just have to be at home and with me a lot more for different reasons than my oldest did. So I don't know. I've been kind of going around and around in my head about how to.
Yeah, having some of those things where they do experience work that has to be done and turned in at a certain time is, I think, one of those stepping stones that's really helpful. Yeah. So whether that's through an internet class or an in-person class, something where there's a homework assignment and you have to do it and someone's going to look at it. And one of the ways we've done that, in more of that 8th, 9th stage is a class that I taught, but I did it mostly for my own children and myself. And I knew that if other people were coming to it also, I was going to treat it like a class.
Yep.
And
absolutely.
Expect the same work from my kids as I do from other kids, but then they also see other kids treating it like a class and treating me like a teacher.
Yep.
And not their mom. So having other kids around the table helped the expectations and the way that we all interacted together for those kind of situations. It wasn't just arguing with mom anymore. It's what was expected across the board.
Yeah. Well, I think we should wrap it up. Thank you all for coming. It's been fun.
Yep, thanks, Brandy.
Thank you.
That's it for today. Thank you so much for listening and being a part of the sisterhood of the podcast. Make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss our upcoming episodes. All of the books and things mentioned in today's episode are linked in our show notes. Just go to scolasisters.com/SS88 to check it out. Don't forget to become a Sophie level member of the Sistership. You will get our spring training sessions with Rosaria Butterfield in May, along with access to all the other wonderful things going on, such as the Charlotte Mason tutorial with Karen Glass, multiple book clubs, and more. Sign up at scolesisters.com/sistership. In our next episode, Mystie and I have Renee Shepard back on to discuss a different, lesser-known essay by Dorothy Sayers. This was a fascinating conversation to have, and we can't wait to share it with you. Until then, we want to remind you once again that homeschooling is a marathon you needn't run alone, so open up your eyes and look around you. Find your sisters.
It's like almost like it's like.
And I do make my kids do chores, so send the hate mail to Brandy.
What?
But well, now I lost my thought. So
maybe it's not.